This episode is supported by the Women's Health Clinic. At the Women's Health Clinic, you'll be seen by our accredited menopause specialists working to the latest international clinical guidance. We believe that knowledge is power. When you understand what is changing in your body and why, you can make decisions with clarity and confidence and feel back in control of your health. We really take the time to listen to your symptoms using evidence-based assessment and testing where appropriate, and explain what's happening in a way that actually makes sense. From there, we support women to explore all effective treatment options, including prescriptions when needed. Our aim is simple: to optimise women's healthcare wherever you are. No fannying around. Find out more at thewomenshealthclinic.eu.
Hiya, welcome back to Fannying Around, the podcast where we talk hormones, women's health, midlife, and all the good stuff that gets tangled up in it. I'm Rosie, here with Katie, menopause nurse specialist, hormone encyclopedia, and the woman most likely to explain your entire emotional collapse with unnerving accuracy. Before we go on, I wanted to say a big thank you to those of you who have reached out to tell us how much you've been enjoying the podcast. Last week we fannied around with Katie. You were loving that one, episode 4. It was a cracker, wasn't it? And the fun doesn't stop there. Today, we're fannying around with Micheal. Now, Micheal's story is not a neat little my periods went a bit funny and then I got a fan for my handbag. No, it's much bigger than that. Micheal is an American author now living in Alicante. She left the US during the first Trump administration with her young daughter, built a new life in Spain, and is now figuring out empty nest life whilst writing books in the mountains surrounded by dogs, which, if I'm honest, sounds pretty bloody perfect, doesn't it? But before that came years of awful periods, relentless bleeding, and a brutal struggle to get proper healthcare in the US, and eventually a hysterectomy that felt less like a choice and more like the only way out. We talk about what it means to try and get help in a system that makes women fight for every answer. The huge contrast between having agency in some parts of your life and absolutely none in others, and how hormones, healthcare, motherhood and politics can all collide in one woman's story. We also get into Micheal becoming a mum through donor conception, the very practical business of choosing sperm from what is essentially a catalogue, and why she knew she wanted a child even if she did not particularly want a man. Honestly, this episode's got absolutely everything. Periods, politics, hysterectomies, empty nesting, Spain, dogs, and fantasy men. And underneath all of that, a really powerful conversation about choice, bodily autonomy, and what happens when women are forced to become their own best advocate. Right then, let's fanny around with Micheal. We were saying, where do we start with you? Because there's a long list, and me and Katie always have a sort of previous chat of how we're going to frame the story, and whether, I said to you in our sort of pre-chat, where we start and if we're going to have enough. But I think with you, we could possibly do a series.
It's entirely up to you. I am flexible.
So, Micheal, first and foremost, then, tell us a little bit about you, where you are at the moment and how you got there.
So I am an author living in Alicante, Spain, and I previously was in the tech industry, and I worked in the Washington, D.C. area, and I fled the U.S. during the first Trump administration with my young daughter, and the two of us came to Spain, and I am now an empty nester. My daughter has gone off to uni in Madrid, and I am in the process of relearning how to be an independent adult.
So I'm using your terminology. You fled to Spain. Tell us a little bit about that, and with the Trump administration and having a daughter, and how that came about and how you led to that important decision?
I I think a lot of people are fleeing from the US currently. I am lucky in that I had a place to flee to. I had always loved Spain. I adopted a dog from Spain in 2012. So, and I had been to Spain as a tourist before then. So that kind of started my love affair with Spain. So when things started to get bad in the US and I started to realize that this was not really the place I wanted to be, I already had in my head that someday I was going to end up retiring to Spain. But I thought it was many years in the future.
Tell me about at what point it got really bad. What was that tipping point? And as a single mum living with a daughter, how that came about, how that felt.
There were obviously a lot of very specific kind of legal things that were happening. And during that first Trump administration, we really saw kind of the failure of the rule of law. But for me personally, it was more about the people in my life and how they were acting. And on the one hand, half of the people were very vocal supporters of Trump and the racism and the misogynistic policies that he was promoting, which was, of course, very upsetting. But on the other hand, there were people that did not support those things that were talking, like they felt powerless. They felt that everything was kind of inevitable and there wasn't really anything we could do. And we were just going to spiral towards this doom. And I was like, oh, I don't want that. I do not want that. I can remember we did, my daughter and I participated in the Women's March right after Trump took office. And for my dog rescue, I had just purchased a large church van that held like 15 people. And I was intending to take the seats out because I was going to use it for the dogs. But I waited to take the seats out so that on that day, I could fill it up with all my friends and we could go into DC and we could march, which we did. And it was amazing. But then after that, like nothing, we kind of lost all of that momentum. And I kept thinking, well, we're building to something. People who are smarter than I am and more powerful than I am and more connected than I am are definitely doing things behind the scenes. They just haven't come out yet. And apparently, spoiler, they were not.
Right.
And I can remember just talking to my friends in the spring and when the kids were finally out of school. And I'm like, okay, the kids are out of school. What are we going to do? Let's march. Let's take to the streets. Let's riot. And no, like they just weren't going to.
People were almost just accepting what was happening. Yeah.
I think that a lot of Americans on both sides have just been brainwashed into thinking that America is the best place on earth and nothing could possibly be better. So no matter how bad it seems in the US, like that's the best it can be. Like there's nowhere that you can go that would be better. Like, I don't know. That was not what I wanted for myself. And it wasn't what I wanted for my daughter.
Were your concerns about the healthcare system in the US for women and how that's going to impact women and their choices?
So for me in particular, I had such a hard time getting access to healthcare. And the terrifying part of that is that I had a really good job and I had really good insurance through my job that was very expensive. And I still, when I had issues, really struggled to get access to care. And I ended up having to change jobs a couple of times. And that made it even worse because every time I changed my job, my insurance changed. And I would lose access to the providers that I had previously. And now I had a whole new list of providers. And I would just start over.
No consistency. So
what was that?
Consistency is super important as well, isn't it? When, we're trying to access care, we're trying to talk about things that are affecting our health. And actually, if you don't have consistency with your provider, that makes it really challenging. It's just another challenge. And just going back, Micheal.
I couldn't even get a provider though. They would give me a list of providers and I would start at the top and I would just start calling and they would say, "Oh, we're not accepting new clients currently. We're not accepting new patients. Try us again in 6 months." And I finally got an appointment and it was for months and months.
These issues that were these to discuss, issues that you felt were to do with changes in your body because of perimenopause or menopause, or was this a separate issue entirely?
So I had always had really heavy periods, but during this time, my periods were out of control. I felt like I was bleeding all the time. I had a very short cycle, and I would bleed for like 7 to 10 days, and then I would have like maybe 10 days where I was not bleeding, and then I would start bleeding again. Like it was just really frustrating, and it really inhibited my quality of life. It got to a point where like I had to wear double pads. I was wearing a cup and double pads. I couldn't wear pants anymore. I felt like I was in a diaper. In fact, I considered like, should I just be wearing a diaper? Like, this is ridiculous. I started wearing skirts, which is just not my style, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. And through all of this, I was expected to like work and be professional, and I had to look nice. And I felt not just like exhausted, but also I felt gross,
And did you have any idea? Did you have any idea at the time that this was your hormones, or did you think, oh well, maybe my cycle's just changed? What were you thinking?
So my mother is one of those women that gets her period every 30 days, like clockwork, and only bleeds for like 2.5 days. So the struggles that I had with my period for my whole life were very much like minimized in my family. I didn't really have, any frame of reference. And I just, I'd had my daughter. I was not using my uterus. I was like, whatever's going on here, whatever malfunction is happening here, it just needs to go. And when I finally got an appointment with the doctor, I went in kind of, very directly with, I want a hysterectomy. I am done messing around with all of this plumbing that is not functional.
And how often do we hear that, Katie, that women have waited so long to get the help they need and the right help, and by the time they've got to their doctor or their healthcare professional, menopause specialist, whoever it may be, they're just done. They're just absolutely done.
I had gone to a gynecologist in my 30s or maybe my late 20s when I was very young. It was before my daughter was born, so it was probably my late 20s. And I had expressed my concern about, even then my periods were very heavy and irregular and my cycle was very short. And they had put me on hormonal birth control, which they said would completely fix all of my issues. And I did not make it 2 months. I had such a bad reaction to those pills. I was nauseated the entire 5 or 6 weeks that I took those pills. And I think that that was my only experience with trying to have a non-surgical intervention solution to what was going on, that by the time I finally was able to see a gynecologist in my mid-40s, I was I didn't even consider the possibility that hormone replacement might help, or some kind of hormone therapy might help. I was just I want it out.
And it always just blows my mind. I see thousands of women. We have thousands of patients, and the amount of women that I speak to that just have so little information about what's happening to their body that they really feel like actually you have no options. And just me and Rosie in the short time that we've been doing this podcast have actually spoken to a lot of women who feel like their only option was just take it out, take it out. I don't want it anymore. And, and whether that's right or wrong, there is no right or wrong. It's the fact that you feel like this is your only option. And that to me is crazy. That is, that blows my mind.
And I have really, one of the things that I do differently as a parent compared to my parent is that I do talk to my daughter and I do kind of share information with her. And she and I have had conversations about, if she decides that she wants to have children, then she should do that. But regardless, whenever she is done with her uterus, we are going to consider very seriously whether she should have a hysterectomy, and not beat around the bush. Let's get rid of it if it's not serving you.
I completely hear what you're saying, actually, Micheal, but I'm going to reframe it slightly, because what I hope for your daughter is that, because, of obviously your excellent communication skills throughout her childhood, but what I hope is that women your daughter's age will, or when they come into womanhood, they will feel empowered with, what is my uterus for? How does it work? How can I optimize my hormones? What role do my hormones play? Why am I bleeding heavily? What can I do about it? And have these conversations will be a lot more fluid, and it will be a lot less black and white than, I have this, I've had my children, or, I didn't want to have children, whip it out. And whilst I think, we've spoken to people like yourself where that has been a really good solution, I just, it saddens me that we feel as women that we have to remove a body part to feel normal,
I hope she has better options than I did, but I want her to know that she has options, and that I want her to very consciously explore those options and make a decision, and not feel to not feel desperate, which I honestly did at the end. I felt kind of desperate, to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Talking about your daughter, Micheal, and how she came into this world, that is of absolute huge interest to me. So could you take us back to your daughter and the decision to have your daughter?
So I have a little half brother, and I was almost 14 when he was born. And I grew up, and my stepfather passed away when he was not even a year old. So I grew up very much, kind of as his de facto caregiver. And it was very stressful at times. My mother, of course, had to work to support us, and she was very stressed out. And I came out of, high school, going into college, thinking I do not want to have kids.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. I am not having kids. And I went to college, went to graduate school, kind of got started in my career, and began to work in professional environments where I was exposed to women who were older than I was. And as I looked around at these women in their 30s and 40s, and some had kids and some didn't, and one of the things that I do is I visualize, where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? I was like, I want a kid. I actually love children.
Yeah.
I have a master's degree in education. I've been a classroom teacher. I love kids. I think it was just, the way I was kind of forced into that, pseudo parent relationship with my little brother had just kind of, traumatized me. And I was like, oh, I don't want that, but I do want my own kid. So I can remember I worked with a woman who was a single mom, and her daughter had burned down their house.
Oh.
And kind of hearing her talk about that she and her daughter had to start over with nothing. They didn't have any pictures. This was before everything was on your phone, on the cloud. They just lost everything. And hearing her talk about how her daughter ruined their lives, I was like, oh, I want a daughter. Yeah, no, that's how you know when you really do like kids. So I did decide that I wanted to have kids. And at the time, I had already given up on men.
Okay.
So I had to kind of re-examine that. I was like, okay, I guess I'll date. So I did start dating men. I was about 30.
Okay.
Yeah. So it took me a long time to come back around.
Just through bad experience?
With men? Men, I don't even know where to begin. That's a whole different podcast.
We don't know either. That's why we don't talk about them.
I think it's really interesting. I'm fascinated by your story, and we'll encourage you to go on with the story in just a moment. But I think at 30, it's that point where you see a lot of women and possibly a lot of men, I can't comment for that, they get to 30 and they think, if I'm going to have children, I need to find someone to have them with.
Yeah, exactly.
Thankfully, or unfortunately, I guess, I waited. I thought, well, my thoughts are, if I'm going to recreate with someone, I want that to definitely be the right person. You know, I want...
Because you're stuck with them then.
You are.
Once you go down that road.
And it's pretty important that this little person coming into your life that you're going to be responsible for, you like those elements of them. And and I think we're sort of fed this narrative of, you know, find a man and have your children before you hit sort of 35. And I thought,
your sell by date.
Yeah, and thankfully I got my dog, so I had my companion. I thought, and similar to you kind of think, well, how much do I want? If I've not got this person in my life, how much do I want this child? And thankfully I did meet a really good man, but it was just a little bit too late to think about children without the complexities that come with having a child over 40.
Yeah, my mom was 39 when my little brother was born. And honestly, that was too old for her. Every woman is different. But for her, the difference in the parent that she was to me versus the parent that she was to my brother was stark. You know, she was just so much less engaged. It was just a different time in her life.
And I think if it happens naturally, then wonderful. But if it doesn't and you get medical help, then there's a whole lot of other pressures that you're put under, and there's a whole lot of other emotional turmoil you have to go through, and which is a very personal thing, you know.
It's physically more dangerous too for both you and the baby after 35.
I see so many women in clinic who either intentionally or by accident have had babies in their early 40s, and I even have a patient who had a baby in her early 50s, and they are... It always seems to be a challenge, and they usually come and see me in, you know, the years after having that baby, because they say, well, you know, I felt great in pregnancy, and then I was, you know, it was the catalyst for my perimenopause, or the catalyst for me feeling horrendous. And now, you know, I have this tiny child that I also have to look after, and I'm really struggling. And then they are my patients that tend to struggle the most, actually.
Yeah, I didn't want to wait too long. Like, I knew everyone says 35, you know, is when things change, like in your body, and all of your risk factors increase. So that was the number that I had in my head.
So how did that decision, that is not actually the run-of-the-mill decision, where did it... I mean, I'm fascinated. Me and Katie were chatting just before you joined us. How do you go about artificial insemination?
We want nuts and bolts. We want all of the details, Micheal.
Yes, all the details.
So I had a semi-long-term relationship with a man who I thought might be a good father. And it turned out that he was... Am I allowed to curse? Do we care?
Yeah.
Okay. He was a philandering, lying son of a bitch.
Yes.
And when that relationship ended, I was like, okay, I am not enjoying dating men. Like, it's really difficult. It's not fun. I don't want to do it. What are my other options? And that is when I kind of, took a step back, and I'm like, well, can I have a kid by myself? And I started doing research, and I made an appointment, and I went and talked to a fertility specialist. Apparently what I had is called social infertility.
I don't know whether that's is that a good or a bad thing?
Like, there was nothing wrong with my parts. Well, from their point of view, it was a good thing, because it meant that I didn't have a physical problem that they had to surmount. This was simply, I didn't have the opportunity for free sperm, so I was going to have to pay for it. And there was a catalog. It was online.
That's going to be my question. So there is actually a catalog that you...
Yeah. I mean, and this was almost 20 years ago. So it's probably much better now. But
And
yeah,
in the catalogue, you see pictures of what they look like, their job,
so they have childhood pictures. So they have pictures of the donors from when they were little.
Right.
Which is wonderful. You know, I wanted a kid that looked like me. So I had pictures of me when I was little, and I just matched it up to this random child.
That was going to be my next. What was your criteria when you were looking for a man then?
So I do not look like my mother. I look like my father. And this was always, and my parents are separated or divorced and have been for a very long time. And this was one of the things where, you know, your mother will look at you and say, you know, your father was a horrible person and you look just like him. So it was very important to me that my child look like me. You know, I wanted us to be a set. I didn't want her to ever feel that we were not a set. And boy, did I accomplish that.
Yeah, I've seen the photos. Crikey.
Yeah. But yeah, so I looked for someone who had the same ethnic background that I have. So German, Hungarian, Irish, Polish, and Native American. So kind of a real kind of stew going on there.
Yeah.
And once I narrowed it down, there were very few options that kind of hit all of those buttons, but the ones that did look like me. So, you know, this before I had the gray hair. But yeah, I narrowed it down to 3 possibilities, and they had all kinds of extra data that you could pay to have access to. So I was able to access all of their forms that they had submitted, everything except for their name, their educational background, their physical health background, all kinds of very detailed physical specifications, like their physical characteristics. What kind of eye shape did they have? Were their lobes detached or attached? You know, the shape of their teeth, like just really.
I don't know if I'm detached or attached. Do you?
Mine are detached.
Think about it now, though. Yeah.
Yours are detached.
Everyone listening now is checking whether they've got attached or detached.
I made the spreadsheet and then I shared it with all my friends. So I got all of the information that I could, audio recordings of their voice, all of their essay questions, the childhood picture, like all of that data, put it into a spreadsheet, shared it with my friends, got feedback, and made my decision.
Do you know, this sounds really exciting. Were you, like when you were going through the process, was it, and I was expecting it just sounds like, in my words, really a really exciting process.
I was very excited.
Were you at all nervous about making the wrong decision? Was it I just love the fact that you got your friends involved and you had all this information and you were able to make this huge decision, but
that's what we spend so much time talking about a lack of choice and a lack of decision that, you know, the feminist in me, it just thinks that this is bloody fantastic. Like, what an amazing choice to be able to make.
Yeah. I felt very in control. Yeah. This whole process, I felt very in control. You know, I didn't really get a lot of pushback. I think it is such a common experience for women when they're dealing with medical professionals to get pushback on things and to feel like they're not being heard. But in this case, I was very much in control. I was in the driver's seat and there was no kind of, you know, well, do you have to ask your husband about this or whatever? Like that just didn't come up. And I don't know if that's because of the place where I went, the doctor that I saw. I went to Fairfax IVF fertility clinic, and I actually bought the sperm from their attached sperm bank that's like in the same building. And the doctor I saw was a woman. So I don't know. It went very well for me.
The fact that you you felt so empowered in this situation is because you had all of the information. You know, like it seems like you had all of the information that you needed, and therefore by default you feel empowered. You're empowered to make these choices. And I kind of want to, take that and I would like to now kind of skip forward and compare that to how you felt when you had your hysterectomy and how you felt, about having, about your hormones and your hormonal symptoms. And I would like you to compare that, if possible.
So it was very different. When I finally was able to see a doctor about getting a hysterectomy, everything seemed to happen very quickly, and I definitely did not have the information that I wanted. Like, I'm sure there was information I didn't even know that I didn't have, but like things that I was asking, I was not able to get an answer to. When I finally got in to see a doctor, the first thing they did was check my blood tests, and I was severely, dangerously anemic. And they sent me for a scan, an ultrasound, and they did not tell me going into it that it was a transvaginal ultrasound, which, talk about things that need a trigger warning. Those are horrible. And they did discover that I did have a large fibroid embedded into the wall of my uterus, and that was causing the problems. And they were like, well, you're really anemic. We need to get you into surgery right away. And everything moved very quickly from that point on. And like, I didn't even know how much it was going to cost. They told me that they couldn't get me into the facility that was covered under my insurance. So I was going to have to go to a facility that was not covered, was not part of my network, and that I was going to have to pay out of pocket for that. I was like, and how much is that?
These are really big decisions. This is not only are you being told that this is effectively an emergency surgery, this is something that needs to happen quickly, but also you're going to have to pay out of pocket. This is crazy.
And they couldn't tell me how much. I'm like, how can I prepare for this if I don't have any idea? And I'm like, give me a range. Is it going to be under 1,000, over 10,000, like somewhere in between? Like, they could tell me nothing. It was so frustrating.
I guess this comes to, it's an added layer of worry, but...
Oh, yeah. It's very stressful.
Would you say that there'd be women in your situation that perhaps wouldn't go ahead with the surgery, not knowing the cost?
Considered not going ahead with the surgery.
And we're going to get onto the differences between Europe and the States in a moment, but I would imagine that would put the fear of God into some people. They just cannot afford it. And I said to you before, what are the consequences if you have the surgery and can't pay for it? What happens?
So medical debt is treated very specifically. It's treated differently than other kinds of debt in the US. And a lot of people don't understand how it works. I'm not sure I understand how it works. It's very complicated. But there are friends of mine who still to this day have very irregular periods, have excessive bleeding, discomfort, and would like to have a hysterectomy and have not because their insurance won't cover it. So there are absolutely women today that need to have this surgery that aren't having it because they don't know how they would pay for it. They don't know exactly how much it would cost, and they don't know what would happen if they had the surgery and then couldn't pay the bill.
And we'll talk about sort of hormones and HRT and everything as well. There is just so much to cover here, isn't there? But it comes back to the information. It shouldn't be that you have heavy bleeding. It is related to your fluctuation in hormones. That is very normal in perimenopause, and because, if that hormone imbalance is not treated, then your heavy bleeding will continue. But wouldn't it be lovely if we could offer women options that aren't going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars or euros, and say, hey, how about we just try rebalancing your hormones first and give you some HRT, and let's see if we can get you feeling great that way before you have to spend an exorbitant amount of money and be put in a situation that, is potentially quite dangerous.
Oh, yeah. The nurse who gave me my blood result information back said, my heart could stop at any moment because my iron levels were so low. I was so anemic that it had become life-threatening.
And isn't it incredible the amount of, and harping back to the artificial insemination and the amount of information you were given there in terms of the male that you were potentially going to take the sperm from. And yeah, wouldn't it be great if we had a catalogue of women's health conditions starting at puberty that we could reference,
One of the big differences.
Yeah, it'd be great, wouldn't it?
One of the big differences in those two experiences is that when I went to the infertility clinic, I was going as someone with financial resources. Like, this is a thing that rich people do. They go to the infertility clinic. I paid out of pocket for this. This was not through insurance. They treated me like a customer, a consumer. When I was dealing with my doctor through my insurance, trying to get my hysterectomy, I was going through insurance that was paid for by my employer. I was 3 steps removed from being the actual customer to the doctor as far as they were concerned. They were getting paid by the insurance company that was getting paid by my employer. And, also, I think, the fact that this is women's health does make a difference. If I was trying to access, I don't know, some kind of, Viagra or some kind of prostate thing, I think the process might have been a lot easier and been handled a lot more differently, but going in, trying to talk about, my women's health, I didn't feel taken care of. I didn't feel respected. I felt like I was kind of hanging in the wind, and I was trying to navigate a very stressful process without dying.
And going back to, you were saying that you felt like all the way throughout your life that your women's health or your periods or, everything was minimized. And I think that, arguably, regardless of your upbringing, most women will feel like that, whether it's been minimized, in the greater narrative or minimized at home. But what that arguably means is that actually when we come to talk about these symptoms, we don't have the vocabulary. So we don't know how to even begin the conversation about the things that are, really affecting our quality of life as we get to our late 30s, early 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on.
I have another example of that. After I had my daughter, we had a hard time breastfeeding. And when I went to the doctor, when we went to the pediatrician for her checkups right after she was born in those first couple of days, they were like, oh, how's everything going? I'm like, well, we're having a hard time breastfeeding. And she's like, okay. And she checks a box and she goes through and, and then at the end of the appointment, she's like, okay, and, have I answered all of your questions? I'm like, well, no, I told you we're having a hard time breastfeeding. And she's like, oh, well, I'll make an appointment for you with the lactation consultant. I'm like, okay. So we finally got to see the lactation consultant, and she gives me this whole rundown on latch. And I'm like, well, that's not our problem. My daughter has a fantastic latch. The problem is that I'm not making enough milk. Like the milk isn't coming. And she's like, oh. So then she finally kind of, took a step back and examined me. And I was like, I realized I have really kind of cone-shaped breasts. They're not, round like most women's are. And she's like, where did you even hear that term? Like, that's exactly what you have. And that's what the problem is. You have I forget the term anymore, but like there was a specific problem with my breasts. I didn't have enough like breast tissue to make enough milk for my daughter. And she was so surprised that like I even recognized that the shape of my breast might be a factor. And I had to push twice to get someone to even look to see what the problem was. It was really frustrating. In the meantime, my child wasn't getting enough milk, and they were just, oh, just give her formula. I'm like, well, I wanted to breastfeed. Like, like I think that's important.
And so you had your hysterectomy, and how did you feel? What happened after that? Obviously your bleeding stopped, and how did you feel? How are you feeling in yourself?
So I did not feel great. Directly afterwards, they told me that I would be recovered within 2 weeks, and I was not. They retested my blood, and I was still severely anemic. My body had gone down so far that it was not able to bounce back by itself. So I had to go in for transfusions. they wanted me to do blood transfusions. And it was one of those things where you don't realize that you have a feeling about something until you're in that situation. Because when they offered me blood transfusions, I was like, ew, no. Like I'm not Amish, I'm not religious, but I was like, I had an immediate visceral reaction. Like, I don't want that. And
I feel a bit like blood transfusions give me the ick a little bit. And I'm a nurse. I don't know why.
Yeah, I had a very strong ick. It's like, I do not want someone else's blood in my body. So we did iron IV transfusions instead, which unfortunately I did turn out to have an allergic reaction to. So
you were allergic to iron?
Yeah, to the iron IV. I started to, like they said, my body started to like go into shock. So they gave me a Benadryl IV with the iron IV the next time. I had to do it several times. And that seemed to mitigate most of the reaction. So that turned out fine. And it did help. You know, it took a couple of months.
Did anyone try and address your the fact that you were effectively in perimenopause, obviously now postmenopause, surgical postmenopause. And was this ever a discussion? Was this, was HRT discussed? Were your options discussed? Lifestyle medicine? Anything apart from just whip out your uterus?
So when I had my appointment with the gynecologist, we had discussed kind of what she was going to do. And she was not going to take out my ovaries. She was going to just take out my uterus and my cervix, and she was going to leave my ovaries. And I was like, I don't really want that. Like, I'd rather have the ovaries gone. I don't want them to be a problem. My grandmother went into menopause very early, like in her late 40s. My mother started menopause in her 40s as well. So, I really didn't see a point in leaving my ovaries. And the gynecologist was very firm that we were leaving the ovaries. She's like, there's nothing wrong with the ovaries. It's better to have them. She told me that only 50% of women after a hysterectomy go into menopause, that if we leave the ovaries, I would have a 50% chance of not going
statistic that I'm not sure is quite right, but we'll fact check that one.
On the morning of my surgery, after I was already checked in my gown, the doctor came to see me right before the surgery, and she was like, oh, we can take out your ovaries if you want. And I was like, well, you were so firm before that was not what we should do. I was so like, in that moment, I had kind of like decision paralysis. I was like, you told me definitely not to do that. And now you're saying we can do that. I don't know what to do. So in the end, we did leave my ovaries. And shortly after I went back to work, like 2 months later, I was fired from that job. So I no longer had access to that doctor anymore. So she had told me that I had to come back once a year and have my ovaries checked. And that's been 10 years and I've never had it done once. So
gosh. And so now, I presume, obviously this was in the States and now you're in Spain. And how would you describe where you are in your kind of menopause journey now? Is this all a distant memory and you feel like you're firing on all four cylinders, or is this something that you're grappling with, day to day, despite having your uterus removed?
So I am super, super happy that I had my uterus removed. I actually did see a gynecologist here in Spain after I arrived. My doctor's office had one on staff, and she was lovely. And she prescribed me HRT because I do feel like I am having symptoms. I've got the brain fog. I was having hot flashes at night. I would wake up soaked in sweat. So she prescribed HRT, and I've been on that since then. And we did discuss the fact that I'm supposed to have my ovaries monitored, and she did offer to have that scheduled for me. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly what happened, but she did leave that practice soon after, and they did not have a gynecologist in the office for quite a while. And I think they have one again now, but it's a dude. So we do have access to the gynecologist at the local hospital, and I have considered making an appointment there. I have taken my daughter to see the gynecologist there, and they were lovely. So I am at least making sure that my daughter has access to gynecological
and that it's,
care.
I think that it's something that she knows that she has to access. Like, I don't think and as Brits, we're different. I mean, Rosie, have you ever seen a gynecologist? I just don't. It doesn't happen as Brits. That is not something that we do. So we're always, stumped when we get into our 40s and these problems happen. But yeah, that's great that it will be something that she is used to doing.
In the U.S., it is customary for girls to see a gynecologist like when they're young, before they're sexually active, and then they tell women kind of best practices that's accepted in the U.S. is that you are supposed to see your general doctor and your gynecologist every year for a checkup. So,
and bringing this back to your daughter again, at the top of the show, you mentioned empty nest syndrome, and it sounds like your HRT is sorted. How's your mental health at the moment, and how's that sort of manifesting at the moment with your daughter off in university? Did you say Madrid or Barcelona?
Yeah,
Madrid.
Yeah. I think I'm doing pretty well. I write, so I spend a lot of time in my little fantasy lands that I have constructed with my little fantasy people that I have built.
Yeah.
I tend to, I have zero interest in dating actual living humans. All of my romantic interests are in my books. This last book.
Yeah, I think I'm just looking at Micheal, and we chatted before. She lives with 8 dogs in the mountains and writes books. I think I might just come and live with Micheal, actually.
You're gonna have to come visit. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got a pool. Yeah.
So you're in a good place, because there's a lot of ladies that will be listening to this that are probably dreading this kids sort of fly in the nest, and
I do joke about it, but honestly, like, my little fantasy constructions are, full of green flags. The mothers are loving and caring, and the fathers are, wonderful and present until they die. I do tend to kill them off, but that's another podcast.
There's a lot of zombies in your books as well, Micheal, I know.
Yes. But there's zombie stories with happy endings.
Okay, we like that.
Like Hallmark worthy happy endings. And the last one, the love interest, was based off of the character played by Hector Alonso in Princess Diaries, who is the bodyguard of Julie Andrews, and he's so sweet with her. And the previous one, the love interest, was based off of Pedro Pascal.
Okay,
so
I like Pedro.
I'm having my life. It's just all fiction.
And we ask everybody this question at the end of the podcast. If you could talk and give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would that be?
I think that being able to finally get the hysterectomy that I needed was absolutely life-changing for me. And I wish I would have done it sooner. I wish I would have done it 10 years sooner. And I think it would have really helped me. Like, I did everything I wanted to do, but it was hard, and there were times when I was so tired and I just kind of pushed through. And there were times when I was in professional situations where, I was standing at the front of the room leading a meeting with, 30 people in the room, all men. And I was bleeding like a stuck pig. And I think that if I wouldn't have had to deal with that, I don't think like I would have conquered the world. Like, I think I would have done everything that I did, but it just would have been so much easier for me. Yeah. And I would have wished that for my younger self. I needed a break.
Micheal, it's been amazing talking to you.
Thank you. I hope this is helpful. I hope that other women hear this and, it helps them to know what their options are and to advocate for themselves.
And just quickly,
I think it seems that when we reflect on everything that you've told us today, it seems like there have been, really contrasting points throughout your journey of womanhood where, you've had such agency and then in contrast, you've had none. And I think that's a really interesting comparison. I think it will resonate with a lot of women.
At the end of the day, I did have agency, even when it was hard, even when I had to fight for it. At the end of the day, when it came to scheduling my hysterectomy, I was like, I need to do this. And I don't know how much it's going to cost me, but I know that if I can't pay for it, they're not going to put it back. I will figure it out. So I did have agency. It was just hard. It's just,
Micheal, I'm in awe of you, and I think you're such a brave lady for all you've been through, and for just making the leap of having your girl and moving to Spain because you want to. Just quickly, because I know you've got a book that would help other people in your situation who are thinking of coming to Spain. What's that called?
It's called Let's Move to Europe, and it is specifically for Americans who are interested in leaving the US and heading to Europe. My journey was about Spain, so that's what I know the most about, but it does touch on other countries and other rules, and not just kind of how to do it, but what it's like when you get here. Kind of what are the challenges that you face once you get here. So, you guys will not know, but for Americans, getting a driver's license in Spain is very difficult. It's a process. Yeah.
And we've not even had time to talk about the dogs, but I've got a lot of footage of my dog actually coming and speaking to you, so I'm sure we'll get that on the social and tag. There's no doubt that the dogs will appear, and we'll tag in your dog charity that you founded as well. Micheal, thank you so much for your time today. Me and Katie are going to stay on. I'll follow up with you by email, but thank you again for joining us. And
thank you for having me. It's been great. Thank you so much.
This episode of Fannying Around is supported by ClearBoost, a women's health supplement range I created after years of working in clinic and seeing how confused and overwhelmed women felt by supplements. Each product is designed to support the symptoms that I see most often: hormone changes, low energy, poor sleep, low mood, and stress, using ingredients chosen for their specific roles in hormone regulation, energy production, and nervous system support. The idea was to replace long random supplement lists with a small number of targeted formulas so women know what they're taking and why. Find out more at clearboost.eu.
Wow, Micheal, love her.
Oh my gosh, what a woman.
I want to be Micheal. I definitely want to go and live with her.
I want to live in Michael's fantasy world. That's where I want to live.
Minus the zombies.
I feel like there's enough zombies in my house, to be honest.
What an amazing
life
lady.
for me.
It sure is, yeah, and me. What an amazing lady. And I think we knew from the top of the show that we perhaps weren't going to have enough time to cover everything. Her menopause journey was, interesting enough without the injection of, the politics that surrounded her move, the arrival of her daughter and the artificial insemination. And that is fascinating.
Oh, I just had so many questions. Many questions. But I particularly enjoyed, and for me, everything is about hormones. Everything is about, choice. Everything is about, women's health. And I was just so interested in the contrast between, the agency that she had, or how empowered she felt when she was effectively choosing sperm, to, in contrast to the journey that she's been on with her hysterectomy. And, I know, and I'm not, what's the word? I'm not dismissing how empowered she felt about the decision of having the hysterectomy and how she feels like that was the right decision. But for me, I just, as a women's health nurse and a menopause specialist, I know that there were other options, and I know that perhaps that wasn't her only choice, but actually that was what was presented for her, and it worked out as the same as it has with other women that we've spoken to. It worked out to be the best thing, but there's just,
I think it worked out to be the best thing because it put a stop to most of her problems, but that could have probably happened a lot sooner given the right treatment and the right advice and the right information.
Oh, that's the thing. And it gets me every time, Rosie. And I don't know why, but I find talk about having a hysterectomy to solve problems, I find it quite triggering, actually.
Yeah. I was twitching a little bit for you. I know what came.
Thanks, mate. I really struggle with it. And it's not because I think it's the wrong thing to do. It's not. It doesn't matter what I think. It's the fact that these women all arrive to that decision because they are desperate.
Yeah.
Because they are desperate to not feel how they felt. And whether that be because of progesterone intolerance, whether that be because of heavy bleeding, it's just that desperation that I feel, as a conscientious menopause specialist, an advocate for women's health and an advocate for choice. Should we get to that point where we're so desperate that this is, a logical step? I find it hard.
What's really interesting for me is that we've done a number of podcasts now, and we've analysed women in the UK, we've analysed treatment in Spain, and talking to Micheal, the system in place in the States, all very different systems, and not knocking any of them. But even with those different systems, it's still not clear. We still haven't got the right information.
No.
It's not a geographical problem. It's a problem with being a woman, that we're just not given the right advice from day one.
Right. And, and I feel like probably this will come up again, but, I'm an NHS nurse to my core. I worked on a busy, a busy NHS ward, and for people listening abroad, National Health Ward, where it was a teaching hospital. I worked with excellent gynecologists, and we took out people's uteruses all the time. That was our bread and butter, day in, day out. And I can honestly say that, as a senior nurse at the time, I can count on one hand over a period of 8 years where I discussed hormones, the impact of hysterectomies with these women. We just took them out. Exactly what really Micheal was describing. I went in, we talked about the cost, and then it was removed, and that was that.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll put this bit in, but I was just thinking, like, you've got a male that's impotent. Is one of the options to remove his testicles? Yeah, just lob it off. Doesn't need it anymore. It's
Chop
like,
it off
with a rusty knife.
But I think this is what pisses me off, is that I feel like why. What it for a start, actually, it's factually incorrect. So, to think that you could just remove something from your body and it not have an impact, structurally, or, oh, well, you don't use it for baby making anymore, so whip it out. Like, it's not that simple. It actually isn't that simple. And, that doesn't mean that it's the right or the wrong choice. And I really want to make sure that that's very clear. This isn't an element, there is no element of judgment whether that is the right or the wrong decision, because ultimately only Micheal knows that. But it's just, have we given enough education to women about what is their uterus for? What impact is this going to have? What are your other options?
What was mental when she was on the table trolley waiting to go into surgery? The doctor came and went, yeah, we can whip out your ovaries as well if you want.
Oh, shut up. Honestly. But it's like, this is the thing, isn't it? And it goes back to what Micheal said right at the beginning, like minimalizing, constant minimalizing of, like, they're so unimportant. And this is such an unimportant, blasé decision that actually we've changed our mind. We can just do it. Do you want to do it? A bit like, do you want to add something last minute at the supermarket checkout? Like it's just,
and just
honestly,
that stat she'd given her, which I know you pulled up at the time, just pulled it out the air. I don't know whether she did or not, but I'm alluding to the fact that she went, well, 50% of women that don't have their ovaries removed
50%
don't go into menopause straight away.
Based on what?
Yeah, based on nothing, because then she came to the operating table to say, well, yeah, we can whip them out if you like, we're doing a bog off today,
Yeah, it's just, it drives me mad. And I think that there are, excellent, truly fabulous gynecologists that do amazing jobs. And, this is certainly not an attack on the job that anyone does, but it is just incredibly frustrating where everything that we talk about, there is just a massive absence of information on how your body works, why it's doing what it's doing, and what are your options. And again, for the 10th time, I will say it doesn't matter what you choose. Only you know what the right decision for you is. But I would argue that you can only make that decision if you've been given every single bit of information. And I loved that Micheal said, that actually with her daughter, these are really common conversations, and, she's reshaping the future. And that's what we should all be doing. And, I think I have these conversations with my boys. They don't give a doodahs about, the fact that we've got periods and wombs, and they don't care. But, soon they'll understand that actually, there's lots of women in their lives, and these women have uteruses and periods, and it should be a conversation.
I think just making it normal, normalising it and having it. It's just something. I remember back in the day, my brother, who's 18 months older than me, always knew what colour tampons to go and get my mum from the shelf, and would go, Mum, shall I go and get the tampons? Yeah. And that's, that was back in the early 80s.
That's amazing, Rosie.
He is a very kind and considerate, caring husband and father now. And I think just, there isn't this shame of hiding tampons up your sleeve of your shirt, or, feeling a bit silly asking, someone to grab them from the shops for you, or, it does start when they're young, but it does, it shouldn't have to be this, strange thing that we talk about. It's just very normal. Yeah, normalise it.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Fannying Around was brought to you by Everything's Rosie, presented by me, Rosie Frost, and Katie Pitt Allen, and sponsored by Clear Boost Supplements and the Women's Health Clinic Europe.